It has slowed down quite a bit, Steve. It's a little after 1. It's 1:01. I'll go ahead and remind everybody we are recording, and I will cut out any personal health information that might appear. And I'm going to mute all now that Jack Ewing is on board. I will go ahead and I'll mute all and turn it over to Steve. All yours, Steve.
I had to make sure I was unmuted.
You are.
We're still adding a few, so that's good, but welcome to the Friday afternoon Zoom Rotary meeting of the Waynesville Rotary Club. Glad to have all of you. Hope a few more join us. Jack is our chaplain.
Okay, let us pray. God, we thank you for this glorious day, and we thank you especially for this time of year when we spend time to give thanks and praise to you for creation, for family, for friends, for the health that we do have, and for this world that we have the pleasure of living in. This is a challenging time for all of us, and may especially be challenging this next week as we have to adjust to a different way to celebrate Thanksgiving, away from family and friends. We pray that we will continue, though, to be grateful and express our gratitude in meaningful ways, and to connect with our families as well. We pray for Bob Herman and his recovery from his surgeries. Continue to heal him and bring him back to full strength. We lift up George Thompson today. We know he has experienced several heart challenges in recent years. We pray that the doctors will be able to determine how best to help him experience full life. And we lift up all of our family and friends who are being affected by this virus, for the hundreds of thousands of people who have died, and the many, many people who have gotten sick from it. We pray that the vaccine development will continue swiftly, and the manufacturing and distribution will take place quickly and smoothly, so that we can all return to a more normal lifestyle. We thank you for this place and this club and our commitment to service above self. May it be manifested in all that we do and say. Amen.
Thank you, Jack. And Rich is our Sergeant at Arms to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test.
Rotarians, Waynesville Rotarians, would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we do the four-way test, please allow me to wish each and every one of you a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know it's going to be a little strange this year, but we all have a lot to be thankful for. Rotarians, of the things that we think, say, and do, number one, is it the truth? Number two, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Number 4, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Brandon asked for an early announcement because he has to get on a telephone call at 1:30. So where are you, Brandon?
All right, I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to try not to come on video as I'm driving down the interstate. I just wanted to make a quick announcement and let everybody know that I picked a fight and we got to win the battle. So I talked to Chuck and we are doing the bell ringing. We have a Rotary Club in the eastern part of North Carolina that some of my staff are on with, the Morehead City Noon Rotary. And we have a challenge with them to raise more dollars on the Fridays that we are doing the bell ringing, the 4th and the 11th, that we can raise more money for the Salvation Army than they can for their Salvation Army. So we have picked a fight. The Salvation Army is going to come up with is that it? What that is? The Salvation Army is going to come up with a jug of some kind as a trophy that whoever raises the most money, we get to keep that jug for the entire year. So I've ran my mouth off, and now I'm going to ask all of you to let's do our best like we normally do on those 2 Fridays. So just wanted to make that announcement.
All right, great. Thank you, Brandon. And I guess we should thank you for bringing us a challenge. We usually like to stand up and do our part, compete with others. So everybody gets signed up for particularly those 2 Fridays, and make sure we encourage as many people as we can to donate as they come and go. Let's see, you have a guest online with us too, Brandon?
I am not sure. I'm driving up the road. I don't know if Mr. Carricker's on today or not.
He is not today, Brandon.
Okay.
Steve, we do
All right.
have a guest on, however.
Who's guest? And
Well, I'll claim him. Malcolm Clark is joining us. Malcolm, go ahead and unmute yourself and say hello to the group and introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Malcolm Cook. Just moved to Waynesville full-time in June and work for AT&T in the field for them, and just looking to find a volunteer group to work with.
wonderful. Glad to have you today.
Great, thanks.
All righty. Cecil, do we have a Paul Harris fellow to deliver today?
No, we don't. Maybe that
Still
was
not with us. Okay.
that was the pinnacle of his career.
Still not with us. Okay. Announcements. Last week we had our meeting on Thursday with the district for the Zoom presentation, and we had 5 Waynesville Rotarians online, and we had at least 12 from Haywood County online out of the 50 who participated. So we were well represented. Let's see, Jack, you were online. Rich, I think you were online. Any of you want to make any comments from what we heard last week? Okay.
Steve, this is Ed.
Yes, Ed, you were online.
For the remainder of the Rotarians in our club that did not get to see it in real time, Ann Matthews is a force that you need to pull up the recording and listen to. Wonderful speaker, fantastic life experiences, and someone who at the end of her presentation will leave you, charged up and ready to tackle, challenges such as the ones it faces.
I've heard Ann before, and she, if it is available on the district website, go find it and listen to it. She speaks for 45 minutes or so, but you'll enjoy every word of it. Thank you, Ed. The district also had a foundation celebration meeting by Zoom this past week. And the Murphy Club had got an award for the best video that was submitted. And we were not in a position to do that, so we didn't even compete. But they have had over 500 people take a look at the recording of that event.
Steve,
again,
Chuck Brown has something to say.
Okay, Chuck. Yeah, you were
Steve,
online too last week.
Do what?
You were online also.
I was. I just want to remind everybody about the bell ringing sign up sheets. And we are not moving as quickly as we normally do in this process. On the, let's see, on the Walmart, we've got 32 spots still available. And on Belk, there's 24 spots still available. So I know that it's still a little early, but we're not having a meeting next week for me to remind you. I need for you all to go and look this week and weekend and sign up so that we know who we've got and what places we've got to fill. The COVID has kind of put us behind the 8 ball, I'm sure, because we got a lot of members that aren't coming in on these meetings, and they're probably all willing to help us. So we need to get another email out, I guess, Cecil, as well. But let's see what we can do. And now that Brandon has got us involved in this competition, we certainly want to show well. So y'all sign up and do what you can this year as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Is Bill Allsbrook with us? He has been working on our blanket drive. And Cecil, do you have anything to announce on that? You and he were working on it.
We've been chatting about the best way to make it happen given the COVID restrictions. And my understanding at the moment is that Patsy at Mountain Projects and Bill have agreed that Rotarians can order off of Amazon, and the blankets will be delivered directly to Mountain Projects as rather than having a box sitting out in the lobby for people to go drop off blankets. We're still chatting about how to document the process, but as far as ordering, I think Bill's going to be getting a link that I'll get out to you with address and everything on how to order, where to order, and how to order. That's the last I heard, Steve.
Thank you. This Bill has volunteered to handle our blanket drive every year, and this year the district governor put out an effort to have a coat and blanket drive for the entire district. So the other 2 clubs in Haywood County are also doing a blanket drive with us. Patsy gave us an indication that blankets were a lot more versatile than coats. Could even be used as a coat. So she requested we do the blanket drive again. So we usually have a very good response to that. And Bill and Cecil will get some information to us on how we can do that through Amazon. So keep your eyes and ears open for that. Tom Natko, are you with us today?
He is not.
Okay. Please remember to go back and sign up for Christmas baskets. Search back in your inbox for an announcement from Cecil on that.
I'll be glad to make a report that Tom gave me, if you'll let me, Steve.
Certainly, Mike.
Tom sent me a note this morning and said he couldn't be with us. Thanked everybody for their contributions so far. Wanted me to let you all know that by now we have 125 baskets donated, and we've got 14 driving teams that have been volunteered to do their work. The delivery day is 12/22, and Tom really would like to get most of these numbers and drivers settled by November 30th, which is quickly approaching. So if any of you feel the urge to give another basket or give some baskets, it sure would be nice to have. And if you've got time to drive on the 22nd, it'd be good to volunteer for that too. We all know that Tom puts a lot of time and effort into his work with the baskets, and appreciate everybody's involvement. Thank you so much.
And then Larry Leatherwood puts in time creating all the routes.
Absolutely.
Which is a real chess match. Let's see, Cecil, do you want to make an announcement about the toy run?
I'll be glad to do that. And I also have Bill Owens' report. I'll do that first. Bill and Charles Umberger delivered 280 meals today, and they went to 6 different schools. So we're certainly seeing more activity on that front. The toy run, virtual toy run is, we're closing in. We're about $4,000 total donations. We're hoping to get to 5,000. We have pledged to match up to $5,000. A number of Rotarians have made donations either directly to the GoFundMe campaign or have sent checks to Mark for Rotary Foundation. And we greatly appreciate it and appreciate the ongoing support for the Haywood children. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecil. Had a note that Giving Tuesday this year is on December 1st, and the target is take out polio. Cecil, have you transferred any of our money to take out polio yet?
No, I have not.
Well, since we've raised a good bit, let's hold on to that until at least the first of December, and I'll find out how we need to report that.
Okay. Yeah, because I do not know. So yes.
Okay. Anything else in the way of announcements?
No one is raising their hand today.
Okay. That means we can turn.
Gordon, I'm sorry. Gordon Goodgame is raising his hand.
Oh, Gordon?
You need to unmute, Gordon. You need to unmute. There you go.
There you go. Just wanted to say one quick thing. The bell ringing that we talked about earlier, I haven't missed for 30 years, but this is one of the things I've been restricted from. But I have sent in my check, my annual check for the program, and it'll participate in the contest. But I'm sorry to have to miss this. Don't get to sing to those little children.
And George Thompson.
I'd like to thank the entire club, and especially Jack this morning for the prayer. 2 weeks ago, I had what they call a cardiac version. I was diagnosed with AFib and the irregularities of my heart. were kicked back into some regularity by the shock they sent to the heart. If you know anything about that procedure, it was successful. There are certain after operation problems, but I'm getting along fine and increasing in strength. But most grateful to this club and individual members of this club who've reached out to me in significant ways. Thank you.
We're glad you're doing better, George. And Gordon. Anything else?
I do not see anyone raising their hand again.
Well, Rick Croskery is in charge of the program today, even though this has been someone else's month. Billy Case has gotten off easy, I think. Rick, you want to introduce our program today?
Yes, sir, President Steve. I'm delighted to welcome you back to our October programs. As this program was originally scheduled for the last meeting of October and had to be rescheduled, and Billy Case was kind enough to let us use this time slot. Today's program, well, all my life I've been interested in barns. Even as a kid in my grandfather's barn, and then as a young adult and just getting interested in cameras and photography, I was one of the ones who'd stop the car and take pictures of barns. And when I found out that there was a local barn alliance that was into preserving and recording the history of our Madison County barns, I was interested in attending one of their meetings last year, which was precluded by an ice storm, so I couldn't get there. And then COVID came, and I've never been able to interact with them. But I did find out about Taylor Barnhill, who is one of the chief members of that group and does all their archiving and such, and was told that he would be able to give us a presentation about the Appalachian Barn Alliance. When I called Taylor, I found out that he has some Eastern North Carolina roots from where I came from, and grew up in the Piedmont area and spent some time working on the tobacco fields in a family farm, and then moved to Madison County and fell in love with it and has been here for 42 years. Taylor currently enjoys wearing several hats, one as an architect, one as a consultant for nonprofit organizations, and one for the Appalachian Barn Alliance, documenting the historic barns of Madison County. His early architecture practice began as a way to serve disadvantaged communities and evolved to provide an integrated approach to sustainable design and community development. In his nonprofit professional capacity, he has served as executive director with several regional conservation organizations covering 11 states in the Southeast. But today, he will be telling us about barns and specifically the Appalachian Barn Alliance. So please welcome Taylor Barnhill.
Hey, thank you, Rick. Congratulations on getting through some of those long words there. That was commendable. I appreciate that. And thank all of you for letting me join you today. Haywood County is one of my favorite places to visit. And you have a distinct history, part of which I encountered a couple of weeks ago. I was interviewing a farm, an old family farm owner, and they brought out some old deeds. And one of the deeds was signed in 1797 by John Strother. And John Strother has had a connection to Haywood County later when it became Haywood County, but he also worked with Robert Love. And I think Robert Love is one of the historic figures there in Haywood County. Your landscape in Haywood County, even though it's very similar mountains, for whatever reason, your agricultural history differs somewhat from ours in Madison County, but the edges of our two counties overlap in terms of barn building traditions. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen and go to a PowerPoint slideshow, if I may. So as I was saying, our mission is to document the historic barn building traditions of Madison County and surrounding region and encourage the preservation of its barns and farmsteads. And we do that through a lot of photography. I will typically, once I've identified a barn that is of historic significance, I'll take anywhere from 80 to 120 photographs of every nook and cranny and detail of construction. And then I'll measure it in detail and do a set of architectural drawings that become part of our archive. We share our archives with Mars Hill University and their Ramsey Center archive, and also with the state of North Carolina. In addition to the drawings, I have a form, a database form. It starts out about 4 pages of just check marks. By the time I get it filled out, it usually runs about 6 to 7 pages. But this tells us every little detail about this barn and its property and the family, hopefully, if they are still in the area. And then all of this will be online and searchable for those people who are interested in this barn evolution here in Southern Appalachian region. So you could type in a particular feature. You might type in flue-cured tobacco, and it would bring up every barn that was ever used or had an association with the flue-cured tobacco industry. Now this goes back about 2 centuries to the earliest property that we have worked with is this on your screen here, the Anderson Farm. This property was purchased in 1797. And for Madison County, that's very early. Being a border county with Tennessee, we were part of the frontier and we're one of the last counties in Western North Carolina to be chartered out of Buncombe County, as many of the Western counties were. In this particular slide, you're seeing a big log livestock barn and then a log cabin. And through the family, we've come to learn that that log cabin used to be in a different location, but it is likely the original cabin built by James and Patty Anderson in 1797 when they purchased this land. And those deeds I was referring to were signed by John Strother, another by Joseph McDowell, who McDowell County is named after, and then a string of other land grant recipients like John Gray Blunt. Yeah, I mix him up with his brother William, who later became governor of Tennessee. But looking back at 200 years of how these barns came to evolve has been very, very gratifying. And we're so fortunate to have families like the Anderson family that had been on the same farm for that period of time. Mrs. Anderson, who still lives in the old home place, her great grandson is the 8th generation of Andersons on that property. Now, the oldest barn that we've found is right on the edge of the French Broad River downstream from Hot Springs, which used to be known as Warm Springs. And we believe this rock foundation goes all the way back to when you've probably heard of Bishop Asbury, who was a traveling Methodist preacher who was trying to correct the sins of this new frontier region. And he would travel around on horseback usually. And we believe that this barn was, this foundation at least was there, and where he probably stabled his horse at an old inn owned by William Nielsen, Scotsman, who came there in the late 1700s. So this foundation may represent the oldest barn structure in our county. This barn looks ancient, and this is the Noah Cleveland Waldrop barn. When I first saw it, I thought, I just can't imagine how old this barn is, because it's all log, and then any parts of this barn that are not these log cribs, which became the stables for the livestock. Any of the other parts are made out of boards that were hand rived by splitting logs and continuing to split the log into thinner and thinner pieces to make boards. He also covered parts of the outside with split white oak shingles, as you can see. Let me ask you, is my cursor visible to you?
Yes.
It is, okay. So I'm working the cursor around on this gable end. These were all hand split shingles, which remind us that up until the early 20th century, all of these older buildings with their steep roofs were covered in hand split white oak shingles. You may ask where white oak, and it was because white oak has a tylose structure, a type of cell in its structure that impedes the flow of water, so that they were naturally kind of waterproofing, and they were the roof shingle of choice. But this guy actually covered parts of this barn. Because of all this hand-riven wood and the log structure and everything else, I thought this had to be one of the oldest barns in the county. Turns out it was built in the 1930s. So it was a wake-up call to me that looks can be deceptive, and that some of these building traditions that started in the very late 18th century continued up into the mid 20th century. Now, one of the other phenomenon that I've come to understand of that early settlement period was that our pioneers, our white settlers, were very interdependent with the Cherokee Nation. And many historians have said if it weren't for the Cherokee, the white settlement would not have been successful. And the thing that they gave us in particular for our early farmers, who were predominantly Scots-Irish and were not familiar with farming this kind of land, even though many of them came from the highlands, were what became known as the Three Sisters. And that was the squash, including these two types of squash. One is a candy roaster pumpkin, and this one down here is the cushaw. And then, of course, the corn or maize, that was a staple food for making meal and cornbread types of foods. And then, of course, any of you from Haywood County are familiar with the greasy beans. I found out just a few years ago that they are officially known as the Cherokee long greasy bean. So that's a piece of this heritage that was very solidly connected to the evolution of our Southern Appalachian farmsteads. Again, the earliest barns were for livestock and for curing hay and grain to feed livestock and to feed the family. They were often known as bank barns. With all of the hills around, it was easy to build back into the bank, the side of the hill, and that gave you easier access to the second floor or the loft level. This particular barn, the access is about the height of a wagon. So if you pulled your wagon load of hay up to this large barn door with your team of horses or mules or oxen, you could, along with other helpers, pitch hay right directly into the hayloft. And of course, down below, you had your log cribs or square rooms built of logs that served as the stalls for livestock. Now, we don't know when this particular barn was built, but it's been part of a farmstead that's been in this family, again, for about 200 years. And again, these older barns started out with this steep roof, would have been covered in split white oak shingles, roofing shingles. But after a while, when metal roofing became available, it was recovered in what we know as a tin roof or a metal barn roof. Now, keep in mind the first 100 years of settlement, white settlement in Western North Carolina, had no tobacco except what was grown by each family for their own personal use. It was mostly a Virginia type of tobacco that had been traded up and down the colonies. But after the Civil War, the mountain economy was devastated. Family farms were barely hanging on, if at all. And the men had come back, the soldiers had come back, many of them wounded and disabled. Many of them had been killed. And during the Civil War, President Lincoln had created the Department of Agriculture. And by 1870, created a stimulus program. And we've all heard of stimulus programs that get kicked in after economic calamity. And this stimulus program was to introduce and support the production of the first commercial crop in the Southern Appalachians, in particular, Western North Carolina. And it was flue-cured tobacco. Now, most of you have probably heard of flue-cured tobacco as opposed to burley tobacco. And this is what I worked in down in Eastern North Carolina, probably with some of Rick's cousins down there. And it has to be heat cured. And so they built this type of barn. It was a square log barn. When you see the logs continuing up into the gable end, you know that that is of the older style, one of the older barns. And then you have these round pole purlins supporting the roof, running horizontally. And this is a very rare type of barn because most of them are very old. Some of them go back to 1870 when this commercial tobacco program began. Many old timers will argue with me and say, no, we never had flue-cured tobacco here in the mountains. It was always burley. But there's tremendous evidence that flue-cured tobacco was not only popular, it was Madison County itself led the state in the production of flue-cured tobacco before Eastern North Carolina did. In 1895, Madison County produced 2.5 million pounds of flue-cured tobacco. And so for a mountain county, that was quite a bit. So this barn is a good example of that square log flue-cured barn. They would have had a small door with a rock furnace with the fire fed from the outside, and they would heat cure the tobacco leaves in about a week's time. Very much different from how burley tobacco was cured. Now later, the flue-cured market was unstable pretty much throughout its history here. But you see this log cabin on the left here. When this log cabin, again, the James and Patty Anderson cabin, no longer of use, they moved it to this site and they converted it to a flue-cured tobacco barn. And I realize this because you see these, the ends of these poles coming out through the logs. The spacing on those is about 2 feet apart. And I knew that had to be for flue-cured tobacco because with it, you only hang bunches of leaves as opposed to the entire stem as you would with burley tobacco. So again, a lot of the earlier log cabins were later used and often moved, relocated and used for curing tobacco. Now, burley tobacco, when it first came in the late 19-teens, they cut the entire stalk and hung these stalks of tobacco. You've probably seen them out in the field after they've been cut, standing up on a tobacco stick, waiting for some of them to dry out somewhat. This is the loft of a classic livestock barn. And this loft would have been full of hay right to the very roof. But when burley tobacco came into popularity, they would convert these hay lofts for the hanging of burley tobacco. And so they would build in these vertical posts and all of these horizontal poles called tier poles for the hanging of burley tobacco, which was air cured. They didn't have to build a fire. They didn't have to heat it. It hung in the barn. And these hay lofts which, as you see here, were often covered in an open lattice work, were perfect for air curing burley tobacco because they allowed a lot of airflow. About the 1930s, you began to transition from using of existing old flue-cured barns and the haylofts of livestock barns to a new type of barn. This looks like one of the old log flue-cured barns. Again, you see the logs continuing up into the gable end here. This barn is made of exactly 100 logs. It was built by John Daniel Shelton and his daughter-in-law. Now, one of the interesting things I've come across is that farmers and farm families all pitched in, and several of the barns I've documented, some of the women were as much involved in the construction of the barn as the men. So his daughter-in-law, Pearl Massey, helped him build this. And to get started, they had to harvest these trees about 2 miles away over in Doe Branch, haul them by oxen team to this site. And if you've ever tried to find a straight tree, you can appreciate how difficult it would be to find 100 straight trees of the right dimensions for a barn like this. This became a transition from flue-cured tobacco curing to burley tobacco curing, and later they actually put some livestock stalls down on the ground floor. Now, one of the things I began to be curious about, I'm seeing these barns and I'm fascinated by not only the craftsmanship that went into them, but just the mass of material that go into these barns. Now, this is my barn. It's 53 feet square. And right away, I noticed that these large sill logs or plates out on each outer edge, this south edge and over here on the north edge, were one tree. They were hewn square or rectilinear from one tree and wound up with a 53-foot long sill log. There are at least 12 other beams and plates in this barn that are the full length of the barn. And to me, that's just remarkable that to go up on the ridge with your draft animals and fell these trees, they had to be very straight. You had to bring them down and hew them square or rectilinear. It was just a monumental task for a 19th century farmer. There's a lot of chestnut in this, as we have noticed over the years of our Appalachian barns. Another figure came to mind, and being an architect, I could not resist figuring out how many wood oak shingles it took to cover this massive roof. And it took over 8,800 hand split, hand trimmed, split white oak shingles just to cover the roof. So it was a monumental project. And I've had great appreciation the more I've learned about these traditional barn building skills and the craftsmanship that went into them. By the 19-teens, when burley was becoming more popular in the mountains, you began to see this new style of barn. This was introduced by Claude Wild up on Big Pine Branch, Big Pine Creek. He was a traveling peddler, or back then they called them drummers, and he came across a set of barn building plans, paper plans, for this type of barn, and he brought it back to Madison County and introduced what is known as a monitor roof barn. And it's a barn with a raised ridge section in the middle. And the benefit of that is that it creates a natural chimney effect. Cooler air comes in from below and works its way up through the tobacco that's air curing, and then out the vented roof up top. This is a monitor roof barn, and the first one was introduced in 1917. By the way, I welcome any information from any of you on the barns of Haywood County. because we'll eventually spread into surrounding counties with our documentation project. And I'm very open to learning what the other county building traditions were. Again, in the 19-teens, metal roofing became available because of the use of the new railroad, relatively new railroad, but also because some farmers were becoming more successful and had more cash to spend on things like metal roofing. It allowed this other type of barn to be built, which is called a gambrel roof barn. Its origins go back to Dutch construction. It has two different slopes on each side of the roof, and that upper slope was shallow enough to where they knew they could not put oak shingles on there because it would not shed water fast enough. But having metal roofing, they were able to begin building this gambrel roof type of barn. So this is a large barn over in Spring Creek. Now for folks, if you continue on 209, you drop over into Fines Creek and the Ferguson Valley and that whole area of Haywood. A true gambrel roof barn has no interior poles. It's basically a roof that is a shell structure made up of shallow trusses. It becomes a very rigid, self-supporting roof structure, kind of a vaulted roof structure. And back with the earlier gambrel roof barns, when you had them built back into a bank, you could literally drive your team of horses pulling a sled of hay or a wagon of hay and turn around inside the barn without the interference of vertical posts. So that was one of the advantages of this true gambrel roof structure. By the mid-1930s, Burley was doing well and farmers began to build larger and larger barns for the air curing of burley tobacco. And you find these huge old burley barns. This one was 80 feet long by 40 feet wide. They didn't know exactly how best to ventilate these early exclusive burley barns back then. And so you have some windows and some shutters and things like that. And the more burley tobacco began to be grown, the better they became at ventilating this air cure type of tobacco. This is also a good example. If you look on the middle of this front wall of this barn, you see how those boards are warped. Somebody wasn't doing their homework when they sawed those boards or felled those trees, and they got in a hurry, or for whatever reason, they probably cut the trees when they still had sap in them, or they cut them during the wrong signs of the zodiac. You remember farmers, and some still today, would do everything by the signs. And also, if you did any cutting of timber, you always did it when the sap was down in the cold months. And these boards here in the middle obviously were not cut at the right time. By World War II, and with all of our military personnel coming home, again, similar to the Civil War and World War I, many of them were disabled. The economy was in shambles for many of these Appalachian mountain farms, and they began to build a new type of burley barn that was much simpler and just had this simple shed roof, and that became the barn of preference. The first one I found was 1947, and this shed roof type barn was built right up until the end of the tobacco program in 2004. The very last type of air curing of burley tobacco was simply a rack that was built along the edge of the field, where they would hang the sticks of tobacco in between two horizontal boards or posts, and just air cured. It would have a simple roof on it. It may have been covered in metal, or it may have been covered in just black plastic. Here's another version of that last version of the burley tobacco barn around 2004. So that pretty much covers the history of this barn evolution here in Madison County. And I think there's a lot in common with your county of Haywood. And I welcome any questions you might have about, I know this is a lot of information, but I'd love to entertain any questions you might have.
Taylor, if you'll stop sharing your screen, we'll get the gallery view back up and be able to recognize some folks.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you for being attentive. Of course, I know you had no escape route, so.
Anyone have some questions for Taylor? Raise your hand, wave at me. Or, Paul Irvin, I see you.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Great program. I really appreciate it. I guess, were you named Barnhill but when you were born, or did you pick up that name after in Barnes?
Yeah, good question. Believe it or not, that's my name. That's my real name.
Had two quick questions. Did you know a man by the name of David Lacey? He was from Atlanta. He actually mainly sold train car loads of ingredients to Lay's and to Flowers Baking in Atlanta area. But he had a number of sidelines, tree farms all over North Carolina mountains and some in North Georgia. But in later years, he's deceased now, but in later years, he collected barns and cabins that were being removed, and he would have to move them sometimes. A few he was able to keep on the site, but I don't know if you'd run into him. He's passed away, but I could contact his family to see if they had preserved any of those that might be helpful in what you're doing. I wish you'd known him because y'all both were in the same direction trying to preserve these items.
Yeah, Paul, I'd love any kind of contact information you might have on him or a family.
The second question is more to Cecil. If I gave this to David's, can they get into our YouTube site to see the program?
Yes.
Do I need to give them a password or anything?
No, the YouTube videos are open to the public.
Okay. What I will do is to get that information to them, and I guess will our program chair have your contact information? Is that Rich? Who would have your, so I could give him an email? Would you get that to me, Rick?
Rick is nodding his head. Yes.
Okay, great. That was all. Thank you for being in the program today. It was a great program.
Thank you, Paul.
Do we have other questions?
Rick,
Rick is raising his hand.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I wondered if the Barn Alliance does have any kind of programs or anything going on that we would know about, or if there's, I guess we could look at your website or whatever, but if you want to say anything about the group itself, about ways we could become involved.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was going to bring that up, and thanks for asking that question. We do have a website and a couple of Facebook pages, but if you just Google AppalachianBarns.org, it'll take you to our website. And on there, we list all kinds of different activities. Of course, with COVID, we've been, for a good part of this year, we've been virtually shut down, but we've managed to do some virtual events. And I have begun doing COVID-safe barn tours with small groups of people, everyone driving in their own cars. And then we are creating a film, which will be a virtual barn tour that will be on YouTube. We're working on that now. But we have other kinds of music events, lots of good food, farm to table dinners. We've just finished up an art exhibit of 18 different artists from the area who go out in Madison County and paint our barns, and then they sell their artwork, and they donate half of the proceeds to the Appalachian Barn Alliance. So yes, thanks, Rick, for asking that. So we welcome you to go to AppalachianBarns.org.
Do we have a final question? We're approaching the 2 p.m. witching hour. Paula Barton gets our final question.
I was just wondering if you'd had a chance at some point to travel to some of the European countries and kind of compare how their barns and things like that to what we do here.
Oh boy, I have not, and I'm dying to do that.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, one of the things I'm doing right now, I'm going to be writing an article for Smoky's Life magazine for the Smoky Mountains Association. And I'm tracing back families that settled in what is now the Smoky Mountains National Park. Many of them are old Haywood County families, and trying to find out where along their immigration history they learned these barn building and cabin building skills. Now, the primary influence on log building came from the Germans and the Swiss, a little bit from Scandinavians. But, you know, my family, like many of your families, were Scots-Irish, and we had no trees left in Scotland and Ireland and Northern England. So we did a lot of stone construction. And when we moved here, we had to learn how to deal with this plethora of trees that were everywhere. And I'm really anxious to find out the details of that history and the passing down of those traditions.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the local families in Haywood County and Madison County were German when they moved here, and then they changed the spelling to make them more anglicized. So some of your last names may have started out as German. I see a Bumgarner in there who may be, do you know your ancestry, Mark?
Unmute yourself, Mark.
There. Yes, that is German. Totally.
Okay. Right. There's a lot of family names that you can pretty well guess they're not Scots-Irish. And those families were one of the primary vectors for these log building skills. But hopefully over the course of researching for this article, I'll learn much more about that.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. You've been a great audience, and I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Thank you, Taylor. We've enjoyed your presentation. There are a lot of barns throughout this area who have quilt patterns put on them.
Yeah.
That effort was started by the Haywood County Arts Council about 12, 15 years ago.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah.
So, I don't know who's handling it now, but I do see those quilt patterns on a lot of barns around the area.
Yeah, and that's an Eastern European tradition that goes way back to hex signs that people put on houses and barns to keep away evil spirits or keep away evil or whatever you want to call it. And they've become very popular and some very beautiful. They transitioned to these quilt patterns, and thank goodness for that.
Well, thank you again.
All righty.
Anything else for the good of Rotary this afternoon?
I'll say goodbye then. Take care.
We will see everybody in a couple of weeks on the 7th of December. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having me.